Everyone who worked the private catering circuit in Manhattan knew 3 rules: take the cash, keep your mouth shut, and never look the client in the eye. Emily Marcus had followed those rules for 2 years, delivering meals to penthouses where the wrong question could get you disappeared. But the moment she walked into Enzo Dante's penthouse and saw the dog, every rule shattered. Because that wasn't just any dog, that was her dog, the puppy stolen from her backyard 7 years ago. The same animal that had just put 3 men in the hospital. The same beast now stalking toward her with murder in his eyes. Enzo Dante watched from the shadows, his hand moving toward his gun. The guards tensed for bloodshed. And Emily, staring at the monster her puppy had become, made a choice that would either save her life or end it. She opened her mouth and began to sing. Emily's private catering gig supplemented her waitress income just enough to keep her rat-hole apartment in Queens, and the agency that hired her out made it very clear that discretion was worth more than curiosity. But when the agency called at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, asking if she could handle a last-minute delivery to a penthouse in Manhattan's financial district, even Emily's well-honed sense of self-preservation started sending up warning flags. "It's a substantial tip," her contact said, "but the client is particular, and he has a dog." That should have been Emily's first clue. The second clue should have been the building itself, a steel and glass monument to power that required 3 security clearances just to reach the residential elevator. The third clue was the 2 men in expensive suits who rode up with her in silence, their eyes never leaving her face, their postures radiating the kind of casual violence that came from professional experience. But Emily needed the money. Her younger brother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves, and pride was a luxury she'd surrendered somewhere around her 23rd birthday. The penthouse door opened before she could knock. An older woman in a housekeeping uniform ushered her inside with urgent, whispered Italian that Emily couldn't quite follow. Something about being quiet, being careful, and, most importantly, not going near the terrace. The apartment was stunning in a way that made Emily's studio look like a cardboard box. Original artwork, marble floors, furniture that belonged in a museum, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Manhattan like a kingdom laid out for its ruler. "Put it on the dining table," a voice said from the shadows, and Emily's blood went cold. She knew that voice, not personally, but every waitress, bartender, and service worker in Lower Manhattan knew that accent, that tone, that specific quality that suggested orders were not suggestions. Enzo Dante emerged from his study like a storm given human form, his presence filling the space with an almost physical pressure. But Emily barely registered him, because behind Enzo, standing in the doorway to the terrace, was Cerberus. Time did something strange. It slowed down and sped up simultaneously. Emily's hands went numb, and the carefully packaged meal she'd been carrying slipped from her fingers, crashing to the marble floor in an explosion of sauce and shattered porcelain. She wasn't seeing a Pitbull. She was seeing Cerberus, the puppy her father had brought home 2 months before the accident. The puppy who'd slept in her bed and followed her everywhere and been stolen during the chaos of her family falling apart. The puppy she'd searched for until the police told her to stop wasting their time, until the shelters stopped returning her calls, until she'd forced herself to accept that he was gone forever. Except he wasn't gone. He was here, scarred, massive, and terrifyingly transformed, but here. "You broke my dinner," Enzo said flatly, and there was something in his tone that suggested broken dinners led to broken bones. Emily wasn't listening. She was moving forward, her body operating on pure instinct, her mind screaming at her to stop, but her heart drowning out the logic. Cerberus saw her approach. The dog's entire demeanor shifted. His casual alertness transformed into coiled aggression, his lips pulling back to reveal teeth that could crush bone. The growl that emerged from his chest wasn't a warning, it was a promise. "Stop moving," Enzo commanded, his hand appearing from inside his jacket with something metallic that caught the light. Cerberus doesn't like strangers. But Emily kept walking and suddenly she was humming. The melody came from somewhere deep in her memory, a place she'd locked away because remembering hurt too much. Her grandmother's lullaby, the one she'd sung to a puppy who'd been afraid of thunderstorms. Dormi, dormi, piccolo guerriero, nel cuore della notte, sei al sicuro qui. Cerberus's growl cut off like someone had flipped a switch. His head tilted, ears swiveling forward. The aggressive stance melted into something confused, almost vulnerable. Emily dropped to her knees 6 feet from the dog, tears already streaming down her face, her voice breaking as she continued the lullaby. "It's me, baby. It's me. I never stopped looking." What happened next would later be described by Enzo's security team as impossible. The Pitbull that had sent trained professionals to the hospital, that had terrorized an entire criminal organization, that answered to no one, not even his owner, began to crawl forward on his belly. Cerberus reached Emily and collapsed into her, 100 pounds of muscle and trauma pressing against her chest, whining in a way that sounded heartbroken and relieved and confused all at once. Emily's arms wrapped around him, and she buried her face in his scarred fur, sobbing. Enzo Dante stood perfectly still, his weapon still drawn, his mind trying to process something that defied every rule he understood about power and control. His dog, his weapon, was submitting to a crying waitress who'd just destroyed his dinner. "Explain," Enzo said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now." Emily looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and defiance, her hands still clutching the dog like someone might try to take him away again. "You want an explanation?" she said, her voice shaking with emotion and anger. "You want me to explain why your attack dog knows a lullaby? Because 7 years ago someone stole my puppy from my backyard while I was at my father's funeral. And apparently he ended up here. With you." The accusation hung in the air between them. Emily expected violence, expected to be thrown out or worse. What she got instead was Enzo Dante studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between fascination and fury. "Impossible," he said. "Cerberus came to me from a breeder." "A breeder?" Emily repeated, her voice dripping with bitter sarcasm. "Or someone who sells stolen dogs to people who don't ask questions?" The words were reckless, suicidal even. But Emily was past caring. She'd just found the piece of her heart she thought was gone forever, and nothing, not even the most dangerous man in Manhattan, was going to make her let go. Enzo's jaw tightened. Then, incredibly, he lowered his weapon. "You will stay," he said. And it wasn't a request. "Until I understand what just happened, until I understand you." Emily looked down at Cerberus, still trembling in her arms, and realized her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to predict. But as she held her lost dog and stared up at the Mafia boss, only one thought crystallized in her mind. "I'm not leaving him again. Whatever it takes." The lullaby died in Emily's throat as Cerberus collapsed against her chest, whining like the puppy he'd once been. Her arms wrapped around 100 pounds of scarred muscle and trauma, and she couldn't stop the sob that tore through her. "Stop!" Enzo's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Don't move." Emily looked up through tears to find him standing 6 feet away, gun drawn but lowered, his expression caught between fury and fascination. The 2 guards had appeared from nowhere, weapons trained on her with the casual precision of men who'd done this before. "I said explain." Enzo's accent thickened with each word, his control fraying at the edges. "Now." Emily's hands tightened in Cerberus's fur. The dog pressed closer, trembling against her like he was afraid she'd disappear. 7 years of grief and rage crystallized into something sharp and reckless. "You want an explanation?" Her voice shook but held. "Fine. 7 years ago, someone stole my puppy from my backyard in Queens. I was 13. My father had just died, my mother was falling apart, and some piece of garbage saw an opportunity." She kissed the top of Cerberus's scarred head. "I called him Cerberus. He was afraid of thunderstorms and slept in my bed and followed me everywhere. And then one day he was just gone. Enzo's jaw tightened. Cerberus came from a certified breeder. I have documentation. You have lies. Emily met his eyes without flinching, past the point of self-preservation. You have paperwork from someone who knew how to make stolen dogs look legitimate. Look at him, Mr. Dante. Really look at him. She gently turned Cerberus's head, revealing the white patch on his chest shaped like a lightning bolt. I used to trace this before bed, every night. Her fingers found the small scar above his left eye. This wasn't here before. What happened to him? Something flickered across Enzo's face, too quick to identify. He gestured sharply, and the guards lowered their weapons but didn't holster them. He crossed to where Emily knelt, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. That lullaby, he said quietly, dangerously. How does a waitress from Queens know a Sicilian lullaby? My grandmother. Emily's voice cracked. She taught it to me before she died, said it would protect the things I loved. A bitter laugh escaped her. Didn't work. Lost her, lost my dad, lost Cerberus, lost everything that mattered. Enzo studied her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, and men like Enzo Dante didn't accept unsolvable puzzles. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, close enough that Emily's heart started hammering for entirely different reasons. Show me, he demanded. Prove he knows you. Emily swallowed hard and loosened her grip on Cerberus. The dog whined in protest but let her ease back. She held up one hand, palm out, and whispered, Cerberus, Zampa. Cerberus, this scarred, vicious weapon who'd terrorized an empire, immediately lifted his right paw and placed it gently in her palm. The guards exchanged glances. Enzo's expression went very, very still. And this. Emily's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Cuore. Cerberus pressed his forehead against her chest, directly over her heart, and held the position. It was the trick she'd taught him when he was 12 weeks old, the private signal that meant, I'm here. You're safe. Emily looked at Enzo through fresh tears. You asked for proof. There it is. Your attack dog is my stolen puppy. Your weapon is my best friend. And whoever sold him to you stole him from a grieving kid who spent 2 years searching every shelter, every street, every goddamn corner of this city trying to find him. Enzo stood abruptly, holstering his weapon with controlled precision. He paced to the windows, hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette sharp against the Manhattan skyline. The silence stretched so long Emily's pulse started racing again. Finally, he turned. 3 months ago, Cerberus sent a professional trainer to the ICU. 2 weeks ago, he tore through a reinforced door because a guard made eye contact. Yesterday, he bit through a steel chain. His gaze locked on Emily with predatory intensity. But you walk in, sing a lullaby, and he becomes this. He remembers love, Emily said simply. Something I'm guessing doesn't show up much in your world. One of the guards made a noise, quickly stifled. Enzo's lips twitched, not quite a smile. You have a mouth on you for someone kneeling on my floor. Yeah, well, I've had a really long night. Emily pushed to her feet, Cerberus glued to her side. And I'm taking him home. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. No, Enzo said flatly. You're not. Watch me. Emily's chin lifted despite the tremor in her hands. You stole him once. I'm not letting it happen again. I didn't steal anything, but you... Enzo moved closer, circling her like a shark. You have something I need, something irreplaceable. Do you understand what that makes you? Unemployed? Emily shot back. Because I definitely just lost my catering gig. That almost smile flickered again. Valuable, dangerous, and very, very expensive. I'm not for sale. Everyone's for sale, Emily Marcus. He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. The question is price. You want the dog? Fine. Stay. Be his keeper. I'll pay you more in a month than you make in a year serving eggs to hedge fund parasites. I don't want your money. 50,000. Monthly, plus housing, expenses, and full medical. Enzo's voice was silk over steel. You keep Cerberus stable. You figure out what else he responds to. You make him controllable. You mean compliant, Emily countered. Obedient. You want me to turn him into a better weapon. I want him functional. I want him safe. Something raw flashed in Enzo's eyes. You think I enjoy having an animal I can't trust? A liability I can't control? You offer a solution. I'm offering compensation. Emily studied him. Really studied him. Beneath the tailored armor and lethal reputation, she saw something she recognized. A man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten what it felt like to have something that chose to stay. 100,000, she said. Monthly. Full autonomy over Cerberus's care, no interference from your people, and a real bedroom, not some servant's quarters. If I'm staying in this gilded cage, I'm staying on my terms. The guards looked like they'd swallowed glass. Enzo's eyes narrowed, calculating, assessing. Then, incredibly, he extended his hand. You have a week to prove your value. After that, we renegotiate. Emily took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and far too distracting. Deal. But if you hurt him again, Mr. Dante, all the money in Manhattan won't protect you from me. Enzo's smile was sharp enough to cut. I'm counting on it. Emily's bedroom turned out to be larger than her entire Queens apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a bathroom with heated marble floors, and a walk-in closet that currently held one duffel bag of her actual belongings and approximately nothing else. Your clothes will arrive tomorrow, the housekeeper, Maria, had informed her in heavily accented English. Mr. Dante has arranged for a stylist. Of course he has, Emily muttered, dropping onto a bed that probably cost more than her car. Cerberus immediately jumped up beside her, circling 3 times before collapsing with his head on her stomach. Because God forbid I embarrass him in my Target clearance specials. 3 days in, and the culture shock hadn't lessened. The penthouse operated on rules Emily was still deciphering. Meals at precise times, staff who moved like ghosts, and an underlying tension that suggested everyone was perpetually one mistake away from unemployment, or worse. Enzo himself was a study in controlled menace. He left before dawn for meetings Emily didn't ask about, returned at unpredictable hours, and conducted business from his study in rapid Italian, punctuated by long, dangerous silences. The few times their paths crossed, he'd nod curtly and continue past like she was expensive furniture he'd forgotten he'd purchased. Until the incident with the chicken. Emily had been in the kitchen attempting to make Cerberus's dinner, raw chicken, sweet potato, and supplements Maria had left with instructions that read like a chemistry experiment when Enzo appeared in the doorway. You're doing it wrong, he said. Emily didn't look up from chopping. Good evening to you too, sunshine. The portions are incorrect. Cerberus needs exact measurements or he becomes what? 100-pound baby who knows how to ask nicely? Emily held up a piece of chicken. Cerberus, sitting at attention, waited patiently until she gave the signal. Gentle. The dog took the chicken with such delicate precision that Enzo actually stopped mid-sentence. He doesn't do that, Enzo said flatly. He does now. Emily wiped her hands on a towel. Turns out positive reinforcement works better than fear. Wild concept, I know. Enzo moved into the kitchen with that predatory grace that made Emily's pulse spike despite her best efforts. He was wearing a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, and there was something dark splattered on his collar that she absolutely wasn't going to think about. You've been here 3 days and you're already rewriting the rules. Your rules were terrible. Emily started assembling Cerberus's bowl. Half the staff is terrified to walk through the east hallway because they think Cerberus will attack. Meanwhile, he's been bored out of his mind with nothing to do except be scary. Being scary is his job. Being loved is his nature. Emily set the bowl down, releasing Cerberus with a quiet command. You can't train that out of a dog any more than you can train it into one. He was aggressive because he was traumatized, isolated, and surrounded by people who treated him like a weapon instead of a living thing. Enzo's jaw tightened. Careful, Emily. That almost sounded like commentary. If the overpriced Italian shoe fits. She met his gaze evenly. I'm just saying, maybe the problem wasn't the dog. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded violence. Emily braced for the explosion, the reminder of who held power here, who signed the checks, who could make her disappear. Instead, Enzo laughed, short, sharp, and genuinely surprised. You really don't know when to stop, do you? Not historically, no. Emily leaned against the counter, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. Gets me in trouble regularly. Ask any manager I've ever had. I'm not interested in your former managers. Enzo's voice dropped, taking on an edge that had nothing to do with anger. I'm interested in why you're not afraid of me. Who says I'm not? Your heart rate, your posture, your complete inability to show proper deference. His eyes tracked her face like he was memorizing details. Everyone who enters this penthouse is afraid. The staff, the associates, even the men I employ for protection. But you stand in my kitchen, insult my methods, and look at me like I'm the one being unreasonable. Emily's mouth went dry. Maybe that's because you are. Or maybe, Enzo said quietly, you're too foolish to recognize danger when it stands 3 feet away. Or maybe I've already lost everything that mattered once. Emily's voice steadied. When you've hit bottom, Mr. Dante, powerful men stop being scary. They're just men. Rich, complicated, probably need therapy men, but still just men. Something shifted in Enzo's expression, a crack in the marble. You think I need therapy? I think anyone who lives like this needs something. Emily gestured at the sterile luxury surrounding them. All this space, and you're still alone. All this control, and you still couldn't manage one dog. That's not power. That's a very expensive cage. She'd gone too far. She could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hands flexed at his sides. But instead of rage, what surfaced looked uncomfortably like recognition. The dog was supposed to be protection, Enzo said after a long moment. A deterrent, something predictable. Nothing worth having is predictable. He bit 3 handlers, destroyed thousands in property, became more liability than asset. Enzo moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the night. I should have gotten rid of him. Every advisor said so, but I couldn't. Emily joined him at the window, maintaining careful distance. Why not? Because he was the only honest thing in my world. Enzo's voice was barely audible. Everyone else bows, scrapes, tells me what I want to hear. Cerberus showed me exactly what he was. No pretense, no manipulation, just raw, unfiltered defiance. I respected that even as it frustrated me. You saw yourself in him, Emily said softly. Enzo's reflection met hers in the glass. I saw what I'd become. Untamable, isolated, dangerous to anyone who got close. He turned to face her fully. And then you walked in and rendered all of that irrelevant in 60 seconds. Do you understand how destabilizing that is? Emily's breath caught. They were close enough now that she could see the shadows under his eyes, the weight he carried in the set of his jaw. Is that why you made me stay? To figure out the trick? I made you stay because watching you with him. Enzo's hand lifted, then dropped. Like he'd stopped himself from reaching for her. You weren't performing. You weren't strategizing. You were just present, real. It's been a long time since I've seen anything real. The moment stretched between them, charged and fragile. Cerberus, finished with his dinner, padded over and sat directly between them, looking from Emily to Enzo like he was judging the tension. Emily laughed, breaking the spell. Subtle, buddy. Real subtle. He's protective of you, Enzo observed, his professional mask sliding back into place. He positions himself as a barrier when he perceives threat. Are you a threat, Mr. Dante? Enzo's smile was sharp and sad. I'm the biggest threat in this city, Emily Marcus. The question is whether you're brave enough or foolish enough to stay anyway. Emily reached down, her fingers finding the familiar spot behind Cerberus's ears. I stayed for him, but I'm starting to think there might be two beings in this penthouse who forgot what it feels like to be chosen instead of feared. She walked away before Enzo could respond, Cerberus trailing at her heels, leaving the most dangerous man in Manhattan alone with a truth he wasn't ready to acknowledge. For the first time in 10 years, he wanted someone to stay who had the power to leave. The weekly meeting happened in Enzo's dining room every Thursday at 8 p.m. sharp. Emily had been warned to stay in her room, but Cerberus had other ideas, whining at her door until she'd emerged to find the penthouse transformed into something from a crime thriller. 8 men in expensive suits occupied the long table. Enzo sat at the head, his presence commanding even in silence. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the kind of tension that suggested everyone was armed. Emily had been attempting to retreat when Enzo's voice stopped her. Emily, join us. It wasn't a request. She moved into the room with Cerberus glued to her side, hyper-aware of 8 pairs of eyes tracking her progress. The men ranged from silver-haired veterans to younger guys with dead eyes and gym-sculpted frames. All of them radiated the particular confidence of men accustomed to violence. Gentlemen, Enzo said smoothly, this is Emily Marcus. She manages Cerberus. Emily, my associates. The introductions blurred together. Marco, Giuseppe, Antonio, until they reached a man seated 3 chairs down from Enzo, mid-40s, slicked back hair, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Silas Corvino, he said, extending a hand. Heard you worked a miracle with the beast. Impressive. Emily reached to shake his hand. Cerberus exploded. The dog lunged forward with a snarl that made everyone at the table reach for weapons. Emily grabbed his collar, her arm nearly yanked from its socket as 100 pounds of fury tried to reach Silas. Cerberus, no! Fermo! Emily threw her full weight backward, her voice cracking with command and desperation. The dog stopped but didn't relax. His entire body vibrated with aggression, lips pulled back, every muscle coiled to attack. Emily had never seen him like this. Not defensive, not protective, but genuinely homicidal. Jesus Christ, Silas said, standing so fast his chair toppled. Keep that thing away from me. He's never done this, Emily said, genuinely shocked. She ran her hands over Cerberus's tensed frame, trying to calm him. I don't understand. He's been perfect with everyone else. Perhaps Silas smells like a rival family, one of the older men suggested with dark humor. Nervous laughter rippled around the table, but Enzo wasn't laughing. His gaze moved between the dog and Silas with calculated intensity. Take him out, Enzo said quietly. We'll continue. Emily practically dragged Cerberus from the room, feeling the weight of Silas's stare on her back the entire way. 2 hours later, Enzo found her in the kitchen. Cerberus was calmer but still agitated, pacing the floor with restless energy. Want to explain what happened? Enzo leaned against the doorframe, jacket discarded, looking dangerously tired. I genuinely have no idea. Emily sat on the floor, letting Cerberus circle her. He's been gentle with Maria, tolerant of Giuseppe when he delivered those files. Even let Marco pet him yesterday. But Silas, she shook her head, it was immediate, visceral. Silas has been with me for 8 years. He's my most trusted capo. Then maybe Cerberus needs a vet because his judgment is clearly broken. Emily tried for levity, but even she didn't believe it. Enzo moved into the kitchen, crouching down to study the dog. Or maybe his judgment is the only thing I can trust. You're saying you trust a dog's instincts over 8 years of service? I'm saying men lie. Dogs don't. Enzo's voice was soft, dangerous. Cerberus has lived his entire life reading threats. He survived dog-fighting rings, abusive handlers, and God knows what else before I acquired him. That kind of trauma creates instincts more accurate than any background check. Emily met his eyes. You actually believe that? I've seen men smile while planning my murder. I've watched friends become enemies over money, power, perceived slights. Enzo's hand hovered near Cerberus, not quite touching. But an animal reacting like that? That's not strategy. That's survival instinct. And in my world, survival instinct is the only currency worth trusting. So what do? We watch, Enzo said. Carefully. And if your dog is right about Silas, his expression went arctic, then we have a very serious problem. The next encounter happened 3 days later. Emily was reading in the living room when Silas arrived unannounced, all charm and cologne. Emily, right? Thought I'd properly introduce myself. We got off on the wrong foot, or paw. He laughed at his own joke. Cerberus, who'd been dozing by her feet, rose slowly. Not attacking, but positioning himself between Emily and Silas like a living shield. He really doesn't like you, Emily observed, keeping her tone light despite her racing pulse. Should I be concerned about your skincare routine? Maybe you're using Eau de Mailman? Silas's smile tightened. Dogs are unpredictable. Can't trust them. Funny, Emily said. Enzo said the exact opposite. Something about dogs being more honest than people? The temperature in the room dropped. Silas's mask slipped for just a second, something cold and calculating flashing behind his eyes before the charming facade returned. Enzo says a lot of things. Silas moved toward the door, giving Cerberus wide berth. Word of advice, sweetheart? Don't get too comfortable here. People in this world, we're all replaceable. After he left, Emily's hands were shaking. Cerberus whined, pressing against her legs. Yeah, buddy, she whispered. I don't like him either. That night, Enzo summoned her to his study. He was standing at his desk, surrounded by papers and laptop screens displaying security feeds. Silas made contact with you today. How did you— Never mind, cameras everywhere, right? Emily crossed her arms. He basically threatened me. Very politely, very subtly, but definitely a threat. What did Cerberus do? Blocked him. Wouldn't let him get close. Emily paused. Enzo, I've seen him react to threats. This is different. This isn't stranger danger. This is personal, like he knows Silas, like he remembers him. Enzo's jaw clenched. That's impossible. Silas has never been near the dog before 3 days ago. Are you absolutely sure about that? The question hung in the air between them. Enzo's eyes narrowed, and Emily could practically see his mind recalculating 8 years of trust. No, he finally admitted. I'm not sure about anything anymore. Emily moved closer to the desk, studying the security feeds. Then maybe it's time to figure out what Cerberus knows that we don't, because that dog has survived things that would kill most people. If he's telling us Silas is dangerous? She looked up at Enzo. I think we should listen. Enzo's expression was unreadable, but when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decision. Then we watch him, every move, every conversation, every breath. And if we find something? Enzo's smile was sharp enough to cut. Then Cerberus won't be the only one who wants Silas dead. Emily woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of Cerberus whimpering. Not the playful sounds he made during dreams, but something broken and terrified, a sound that clawed at her chest. She found him pressed into the corner of her room, shaking violently. His eyes were wild, unfocused, and when she approached, he didn't seem to recognize her. Hey, it's okay. Emily dropped to the floor slowly, making herself small. It's me, baby. You're safe. She started humming the lullaby, watching him struggle between panic and recognition. Gradually, painfully, Cerberus crawled toward her. When he finally reached her lap, Emily felt wetness on her hands. Blood. His paws were bleeding where he'd been scratching at the floor. "What happened to you?" Emily whispered, examining the self-inflicted wounds. "What are you so afraid of?" As she cleaned and bandaged his paws, memory surfaced, sharp and unwanted. The night Cerberus was stolen, she'd heard sounds from the backyard. Shouting, the puppy's terrified yelping, and one voice, distinct above the others, laughing as they dragged him away. "Shut up, you little bastard! You're worth good money now." She'd been too young, too traumatized to describe the voice to police. But Cerberus, wouldn't have forgotten. Dogs remembered scents, voices, the specific cadence of cruelty. Emily's blood ran cold. She'd heard that laugh 3 days ago when Silas made his joke about dogs being unpredictable. The same pitch, the same casual malice disguised as humor. "Oh my God," Emily breathed. "It's him! It was always him!" Cerberus pressed harder against her, confirming what she couldn't yet prove but knew in her bones. Silas Corvino hadn't just met this dog 3 days ago. He'd stolen him 7 years ago, which meant everything about Silas's position in Enzo's organization was built on lies. Emily grabbed her phone with shaking hands. It was 3:47 a.m. She texted Enzo, "Need to talk, now. It's about Silas." The response came in seconds. "My study, 5 minutes." Enzo was already there when she arrived, looking like he hadn't slept. Cerberus entered cautiously, still agitated, staying close to Emily. "This better be important," Enzo said, but there was no real anger in his voice, only exhaustion and something that looked like dread. "Silas stole Cerberus." Emily said it fast, before courage failed. 7 years ago, from my backyard. He's the one who took him." The silence was deafening. "Explain," Enzo said, his voice dropping to that deadly quiet that meant someone was about to die. Emily told him everything, the specific fear response, the cowering rather than attacking, the way Cerberus had reacted to Silas's laugh. Dogs don't forget trauma. They especially don't forget the people who caused it. Cerberus isn't aggressive toward Silas because he's protecting me. He's terrified because Silas is the person who ripped him from everything safe and sold him into hell. Enzo was very, very still. "You're accusing my most trusted lieutenant of dog theft, based on animal behavior and a 7-year-old memory." "I'm accusing him of being a liar," Emily countered. "If he stole Cerberus, if he was involved in trafficking stolen dogs, then what else is he lying about? His loyalty, his position, his intentions? This is speculation." "Then let me test it." Emily's voice was steady now, fueled by righteous anger. "Let me bring Cerberus to Silas when he's not expecting it. No warning, no performance. If I'm wrong, Cerberus will calm down. But if I'm right?" She met Enzo's gaze. "You'll see the truth in under 30 seconds. Enzo moved to his desk, pulling up files with swift, precise clicks. Security footage, financial records, background checks. His jaw tightened with each screen. "Silas joined my organization 8 years ago. Came recommended by the Castellano family. Rose quickly through ranks." Enzo's voice was clinical, detached, the tone of a man building a case. "But his initial background check was conducted by a firm that's since been investigated for falsifying documents." "Meaning?" "Meaning, if someone wanted to plant a man in my organization, Silas's entry point was exactly where they'd exploit." Enzo looked up, his eyes blazing with cold fury. "If you're right, if he's been lying for 8 years, then this isn't about a stolen dog. This is about infiltration, long-term positioning, a slow-motion coup." Emily's stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Silas knowing your dog isn't coincidence. Nothing is coincidence in my world." Enzo stood, buttoning his jacket with sharp, angry movements. "If he took Cerberus 7 years ago, he was already working for someone, building connections in the underground animal trade, establishing criminal credentials. And then he used those credentials to get close to me. But why? Why go through all that trouble? Enzo's smile was terrifying. Because I'm worth the investment, and if someone's been patient enough to wait 8 years, they're planning something catastrophic. He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. I'm calling in Marco and Giuseppe. We move carefully, quietly. If Silas suspects we know, he'll accelerate whatever timeline he's working toward. What do you need me to do? Enzo looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. I need you to stay alive, because if I'm right about this, you're the only person who can prove it, which makes you the most dangerous person in Manhattan. Emily's hand found Cerberus's head. The dog had calmed slightly, responding to her presence, but his eyes never left Enzo. Then I guess we'd better move fast, Emily said, before Silas figures out his cover is blown. Enzo crossed to her, close enough that she could feel the rage radiating off him like heat. If he's betrayed me, if everything I've built has a traitor at its core, his voice cracked just slightly, I will burn his entire world down. Good, Emily said fiercely, because he stole my dog, sold him into violence, and apparently used that crime to position himself to destroy you. So get in line. For the first time since she'd met him, Enzo Dante laughed, genuine, surprised, and just a little bit unhinged. You know what's terrifying, Emily Marcus? I'm starting to think you're more dangerous than I am. Only one way to find out, Emily replied. Let's catch a traitor. The war room, because that's what Enzo called his secure conference room, was soundproofed, bug-swept, and currently occupied by 4 people and 1 very tense Pitbull. Marco and Giuseppe had arrived within 20 minutes, both armed, both wearing expressions that suggested they'd been expecting this call. Enzo stood at the head of the table, security feeds and financial records projected on 3 screens behind him. Silas Corvino, Enzo said without preamble, is compromised, potentially has been since day 1. We're going to prove it, and then we're going to end him. Marco, a scarred veteran with silver threading his temples, leaned forward. What's the evidence? The dog, Giuseppe said, surprising everyone. At their looks, he shrugged. What? I've seen Cerberus with everyone in the organization. He tolerates us, ignores most people, loves Emily. But Silas, the animal wants him dead. That's not random. It's not, Emily confirmed. Cerberus knows Silas from before. From when Silas was trafficking stolen animals 7 years ago. Marco's eyes narrowed. You can prove this? The dog's behavior is proof, Enzo said coldly. But more importantly, I started digging into Silas's history tonight. His background check was falsified, his references are ghosts, and his financials show regular deposits from an offshore account connected to the Marchetti family. The name landed like a bomb. Giuseppe cursed in Italian. Marco's hand moved to his weapon. The Marchettis have been trying to absorb our territory for 3 years, Marco said. If Silas is theirs, then he's been feeding them intelligence for 8 years, Enzo finished. Shipment routes, security protocols, financial vulnerabilities, everything they'd need to dismantle us from the inside. Emily watched the men process this betrayal, saw the rage building behind professional masks, but it was Enzo's contained fury that terrified her most, the kind of anger that didn't explode but calculated, planned, and executed with surgical precision. There's more, Enzo continued. Tomorrow night, we're transferring a major asset, $3 million in cash and product, to our warehouse in Red Hook. Silas is coordinating security. He let that sink in. It's the perfect opportunity for an ambush. The Marchettis hit us during transfer, take the assets, eliminate key personnel. Silas walks away clean, positioned to take over what's left. So we cancel the transfer, Giuseppe said immediately. No, Emily surprised herself by speaking. If you cancel, Silas knows you're suspicious. He'll go to ground and you'll never prove his betrayal. The Marchettis will just try again when you're less prepared. All 3 men stared at her. Enzo's lips twitched. She's right, he said. "We don't cancel. We let Silas think everything's proceeding as planned, and we turn his ambush into ours." Marco nodded slowly. A trap within a trap. Use his own strategy against him. Exactly, but we need leverage he won't anticipate. Enzo's gaze locked on Emily. "Which is where you come in." Emily's stomach flipped. "Me?" "You and Cerberus," Enzo clarified. "Silas doesn't know we've identified him. He certainly doesn't know the dog is our evidence. If you're present during the transfer—" "Absolutely not," Marco interrupted. "Too dangerous. If shooting starts, Cerberus will protect her," Enzo said, "and more importantly, the dog will identify any Marchetti operatives connected to his theft. He'll react the same way he reacts to Silas, immediate, visceral. He's a biological early warning system." "You want to use me as bait?" Emily said slowly. "I want to use you as an asset," Enzo corrected. "Silas thinks you're decorative. A complication I'm tolerating because of the dog. He has no idea you're intelligent, observant, and capable of identifying threats he doesn't know you can see." Emily looked at Cerberus, who was watching Enzo with unusual focus. The dog had stopped shaking, stopped cowering. He looked ready, like he understood something important was happening. "If I do this," Emily said carefully, "I'm not hiding in a car or standing on the sidelines. If I'm your early warning system, I need to be positioned where Cerberus can actually detect threats." "Absolutely not," Marco started. "She's right," Giuseppe interrupted. "Cerberus won't work if Emily's locked away. The dog only functions when she's present. We've all seen it." Enzo was very quiet, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked at Emily. "If you do this, you follow orders without question. You wear body armor. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood," Emily said. "But I have one condition." Marco made a sound of disbelief. Giuseppe actually smiled. Enzo raised an eyebrow, waiting. "When this is over, when Silas and whoever he's working with are dealt with, Cerberus gets to choose what happens to him." Emily's voice was steady. "Not you, not me. We give him the choice to stay or go somewhere safe. No cages, no weapons, no forcing him into a life he didn't choose. He's earned that." The silence stretched. Then Enzo did something Emily never expected. He extended his hand across the table. "You have my word." Emily took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and lingered just a moment too long. "Now," Enzo said, not releasing her hand, "let's discuss how we're going to destroy everyone who thought they could take what's mine." They worked through the night. Marco sketched security positions. Giuseppe identified potential sniper nests and escape routes. Enzo orchestrated the counter-ambush with the precision of a chess master. But it was Emily who noticed the pattern in the Marchetti family's previous hits, always during chaos, always with inside coordination, always leaving one person alive to spread fear. "They'll want a witness," she said, pointing to the timeline Giuseppe had built. "Someone to report back that Enzo Dante is vulnerable, that his organization is compromised. That's how they build territory, through fear." Enzo studied her with unsettling intensity. "You think tactically." "I think like someone who survived a bad neighborhood with worse options," Emily corrected. "Same principles, different tax bracket." Marco actually laughed. "She fits here, boss. Just saying." By 4 a.m., they had a plan. Risky, multi-layered, and entirely dependent on Cerberus's ability to identify threats and Emily's ability to stay alive long enough for the dog to work. As Marco and Giuseppe left to prepare, Enzo stopped Emily at the door. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I can pay you out, relocate you and Cerberus somewhere safe." "You don't owe me loyalty." Emily looked up at him, seeing past the dangerous exterior to the man who'd admitted his isolation, who'd recognized her value before anyone else had, who was trusting her with his life. "Maybe not," she said, "but Cerberus does. And apparently I'm foolish enough to stay anyway. Enzo's hand came up, hesitating inches from her face before falling away. After tomorrow, if we survive. When we survive, Emily corrected. When we survive, Enzo repeated, something raw and honest in his voice. You and I are going to have a very different conversation. Looking forward to it, Emily said, and meant it more than she should. As she walked away, Cerberus trailing at her heels, she heard Enzo's voice one last time. Emily, don't get killed tomorrow. I'd be displeased. She smiled despite the fear. Noted, boss. I'll try not to inconvenience you with my death. His laugh followed her down the hallway, dark and rich and unexpectedly hopeful. Tomorrow they'd face betrayal, violence, and potential death. But tonight, for the first time since her father died, Emily Marcus felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The Red Hook warehouse squatted on the waterfront like a rusted monument to industry's corpse. At 11 p.m., under cloud cover that erased the stars, 3 black SUVs pulled into the loading bay with military precision. Emily sat in the second vehicle, body armor tight across her chest, earpiece feeding her a constant stream of Marco's positioning updates. Cerberus pressed against her leg, alert but calm, waiting. Asset team approaching, Giuseppe's voice crackled. Enzo's vehicle arriving now. Through the tinted windows, Emily watched Enzo emerge from the lead SUV. He moved like a king entering conquered territory, confident, untouchable, completely unaware that his trusted lieutenant had sold him out. Except he wasn't unaware. He was bait. Silas is inside, Marco reported. 4 of his personal security team. Unknown contacts in the south corner. Thermals show 3 additional bodies. Emily's pulse spiked. That's 7 against our 12. Unless Silas brought more we haven't detected, Giuseppe replied grimly. Stay sharp. Enzo disappeared into the warehouse. Emily counted 30 seconds, then keyed her mic. Cerberus and I are moving to position 2. East entrance. Sightline to the main floor. Negative, Marco snapped. You stay in the vehicle until what? Until shooting starts and Cerberus can't reach Enzo? Emily was already opening the door. We discussed this. I'm the early warning system, not the backup plan. She heard Marco curse, but he didn't countermand. Emily moved through shadows with Cerberus gliding beside her, his body language shifting from companion to weapon. They reached the east entrance, a rusted door Giuseppe had left cracked open, and slipped inside. The warehouse stretched before them, concrete floors, steel support beams, and shipping containers stacked like metal coffins. Enzo stood in the center under harsh overhead lights, $3 million in cash arranged on pallets behind him. Silas approached from the south, flanked by his security team. Everything's in order, Silas called out, his voice echoing. Product arrives in 10 minutes. We'll have you out before midnight. Enzo nodded, playing his role perfectly. Good. The Castellanos are getting impatient. Emily watched from the shadows, Cerberus rigid beside her. The dog's attention was locked on Silas, but something else had captured his focus, the 3 men emerging from behind the southern containers. Cerberus's lips pulled back, a low growl built in his chest. Easy, Emily whispered, her hand finding his collar. Not yet, baby, not yet. Through her earpiece, Marco's voice cut in. Thermals show movement on the roof, multiple contacts. This is it. They're moving early. On the warehouse floor, Silas checked his watch. Then he smiled. Actually, Enzo, there's been a change of plans. Enzo turned slowly, and even from a distance, Emily could see his expression, not surprised, but coldly furious. Has there? Enzo's hand moved toward his jacket. Silas pulled a remote from his pocket and pressed a button. Instantly, the warehouse's roller doors slammed shut with hydraulic force. The overhead lights cut out, replaced by emergency reds that painted everything in shades of blood. And from the containers, at least 15 armed men emerged. You should have killed the dog when you had the chance, Silas said, pulling his weapon. Sentimental weakness, Enzo. Fatal flaw. The dog, Enzo replied quietly, was never the weakness. You were. Silas's smile faltered. You knew. I've known since the moment you laughed at Emily's joke about dog trainers. The same laugh, Silas. The exact same laugh she heard 7 years ago when you stole her puppy. Enzo's voice was ice and death. Did you really think you could infiltrate my organization using falsified credentials, work for the Marchettis for 8 years, and I wouldn't eventually figure it out? The warehouse erupted. Silas's men opened fire. Enzo dove behind a container as Marco and Giuseppe's teams returned fire from concealed positions. The carefully orchestrated ambush became chaos, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness, bullets sparking off metal, shouts in Italian and English blending into white noise. Emily pressed against the wall, her heart hammering. This was worse than planned. Too many shooters, too much crossfire. Even with body armor, one lucky shot. Cerberus lunged forward, barking. No! Emily grabbed for him, but the dog was already moving, drawn by something she couldn't see. She followed on instinct, staying low, using containers for cover. Then she saw it. Silas, circling around behind Enzo's position. He had a clear shot. Enzo, pinned down by suppressing fire, didn't see the threat. Emily's training, all those late-night strategy sessions, the contingency plans they'd built, crystallized into action. She pulled out the phone Giuseppe had given her, keyed in the code, and sent a single text to Enzo's secure line. Dormi, piccolo guerriero. 3 seconds. That's how long it took Enzo to read it, process it, and understand. He keyed his own mic. Marco, Giuseppe, execute Cerberus protocol. Now. Emily didn't wait for confirmation. She looked at Cerberus, at the dog who'd survived hell and found his way back to her, and gave the command she'd prayed she'd never have to use. Cerberus, protegere, attacco. The Pitbull exploded forward like a missile. 100 pounds of loyal fury and trauma-fueled justice, moving faster than Emily thought possible. Silas raised his weapon toward Enzo's exposed position. Cerberus hit him like a freight train. The gun flew from Silas's hand as the dog drove him to the ground. Silas screamed, trying to protect his throat, but Cerberus wasn't going for the kill. He was holding, teeth locked on Silas's gun arm, preventing him from reaching a backup weapon, pinning him down with savage precision. "Call him off!" Silas shrieked. "Call him off!" Enzo emerged from cover, weapon trained on Silas. Behind him, Marco and Giuseppe's teams were systematically neutralizing the Marchetti operatives. The ambush had become a slaughter, but not the one Silas had planned. "Emily," Enzo said, his voice carrying across the warehouse, "Your dog. Your call." Emily stepped into the light, and the look on Silas's face when he saw her, genuine terror mixed with disbelief, was almost worth the fear. "You remember me now?" Emily crouched just out of reach. "The crying kid in Queens whose puppy you stole? You sold him to a dogfighting ring. They tortured him, turned him into this, and you used that crime to get close to Enzo, to position yourself to destroy everything he built." "It was business," Silas gasped around Cerberus's grip. "Nothing personal." "Everything is personal," Emily said coldly. "Cerberus, rilasciare." The dog released Silas's arm but didn't move away. He stood over the traitor like a judge awaiting sentencing. Enzo moved beside Emily, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Marco, secure the Marchetti operatives. Call our contacts in the NYPD. Anonymous tip about a weapons cache and attempted robbery should suffice." He looked down at Silas without a trace of mercy. "As for you?" "Enzo, please," Silas begged. "We can negotiate. I have information, contacts, I can—" "You have nothing," Enzo said quietly. "You're a traitor who got outsmarted by a waitress and a dog. That's your legacy." He nodded to Giuseppe, who moved forward with zip ties. As they dragged Silas away, Still begging, still bargaining, Enzo holstered his weapon and turned to Emily. "You saved my life," he said simply. "You trusted me enough to let me try," Emily replied. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. "Is it over? Are we—" Enzo pulled her against him, one hand cupping the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. The kiss was fierce, desperate, and tasted like gunpowder and relief. Emily melted into it, her fear transmuting into something incandescent and overwhelming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Enzo rested his forehead against hers. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe. Cerberus is safe, and I am completely, irrevocably yours." Emily laughed, giddy and terrified and more alive than she'd ever felt. "That's the adrenaline talking." "No," Enzo said, his dark eyes burning. "That's 8 days of watching you be brave, brilliant, and entirely too dangerous for my peace of mind. That's me realizing I don't want a weapon or an asset. I want you. Completely. Always." Cerberus pushed between them, whining for attention. They both laughed, the tension breaking as Emily dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the dog who'd saved them all. "Good boy," she whispered. "The best boy. You're finally free." Enzo crouched beside them, one hand on Emily's shoulder, one hand tentatively touching Cerberus's head. The dog allowed it, accepted it, and for the first time since Emily had met him, Enzo Dante smiled without shadows. "Let's go home," he said. "All of us, together." The penthouse felt different at 3 a.m., quieter, more honest, like the city outside had finally exhaled and allowed truth to surface. Emily sat on the floor of Enzo's living room, still wearing her tactical pants and a borrowed shirt, watching Cerberus sleep. The dog was sprawled on his back, legs in the air, completely vulnerable in a way he'd never been before tonight, like he finally understood he was safe. "He's never done that," Enzo said from the doorway. He'd showered, changed into simple black pants and a white t-shirt that made him look younger, less armored. "Slept like that." "He knows it's over," Emily said softly. "The threat is gone. He can finally rest." Enzo moved into the room, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed her one, then sat beside her, not at a careful distance, but close enough that their shoulders touched. "You should be terrified of me," he said after a long silence. "After tonight, after seeing what my world actually is, you should be running." "Probably," Emily agreed. She took a sip of whiskey, letting it burn. "But I've seen both sides of you now. The mafia boss who orders executions without blinking, and the man who let a dog he couldn't control stay because he respected its refusal to bow. Those aren't different sides. They're the same person." "I know." Emily turned to look at him. "That's why I'm not running, because you're complicated and dangerous and definitely have a therapist's lifetime worth of issues. But you're also honest about what you are. You don't pretend to be good, but you recognize good when you see it. In Cerberus, in Marco and Giuseppe's loyalty, in you," Enzo finished. "Emily, I've built my entire life on control. Controlling territory, controlling men, controlling every variable so I'm never vulnerable." His hand found hers, fingers threading together. "And then you walked into my penthouse, sang a lullaby, and made me realize I've been controlling everything except the one thing that mattered, my own isolation." Emily's breath caught. "Enzo, I love you." He said it simply, without flourish, like stating an undeniable fact. "I have absolutely no right to, and it's probably the most selfish thing I've ever done, but watching you tonight, seeing you risk everything for a dog, for me, for something beyond self-preservation, I realized I don't want to live in a world where you're not beside me, not as an asset, not as an employee, as my partner, my equal, my reason for building something better than what I inherited." Emily set down her whiskey with shaking hands. That's quite a declaration from a man who couldn't admit he liked having me around a week ago. I'm Italian, Enzo said, his smile crooked and devastatingly vulnerable. We're not known for emotional restraint once we commit. Lucky for you, Emily whispered. I'm foolish enough to love you back, despite the murder, the danger, and the truly terrible hours you keep. Enzo's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with such gentleness it made her chest ache. I can't promise you safety. My world doesn't work that way, but I can promise you truth, loyalty, and a partnership where your voice matters as much as mine. I can promise you that what we build together will be worth the risk. That's all I've ever wanted, Emily said. To matter. To be chosen, not tolerated. You are chosen, Enzo said fiercely. By me, by Cerberus, by every part of this life we're going to build. He paused, something uncertain flickering in his expression. Which brings me to a question I've never asked anyone before, and have no idea how to ask properly. Emily's heart was hammering. Try. Enzo took both her hands, holding them like they were precious, breakable things. Emily Marcus, waitress, dog whisperer, tactical genius, and the only person who's ever made me want to be someone worthy of trust. Will you marry me? Not as a transaction, not as protection, as an equal, as the person I want beside me when I remake this empire into something we can both be proud of. Emily laughed, giddy, overwhelmed, and certain. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only proposal you've ever heard, Enzo countered. Fair point. Emily leaned forward, kissing him softly. Yes, I'll marry you, on one condition. Enzo's eyes narrowed with amused suspicion. Why do I feel like this condition is going to cost me millions? Because you're smart and you know me, Emily said. We'll discuss terms tomorrow. Tonight, I just want to sit here with you and the dog and pretend we're normal people who fell in love without the murder and betrayal. We'll never be normal, Enzo said, pulling her against his chest. No, Emily agreed, settling into his arms while Cerberus snored between them. But we might be happy, and that's better. They stayed that way as the city woke around them, the mafia boss, the waitress, and the dog who'd brought them together, the most unlikely family Manhattan had ever seen, and for the first time in either of their lives, they both felt completely, perfectly home. 6 months later, the groundbreaking ceremony attracted more attention than Enzo had anticipated. News crews, city officials, and more importantly, families from every borough who'd heard whispers about the project and showed up to see if it was real. The Second Chances Animal Sanctuary and Rehabilitation Center occupied 15 acres in Westchester, just far enough from Manhattan to offer peace, but close enough for Emily to manage both her new role and her life with Enzo. Emily stood at the podium, wearing a tailored suit Enzo had insisted on, and the engagement ring that probably cost more than the entire facility's first-year operating budget. Cerberus sat beside her in his official therapy dog vest, calm and regal and utterly transformed from the weapon he'd once been. Most of you know the story, Emily began, her voice steady despite the cameras. How I found my stolen dog after 7 years. How he'd been forced into violence, into being something he wasn't. But what the news didn't tell you is what happened after. She gestured to the architectural renderings behind her, modern buildings, spacious runs, therapy pools, and training facilities designed by the country's top animal behaviorists. This sanctuary exists because someone powerful decided that redemption wasn't just possible, it was necessary. That animals who'd been abused, abandoned, or forced into violence deserved a second chance at peace, and that the people who'd harmed them deserved to face consequences. In the crowd, Emily spotted Marco and Giuseppe, both wearing suits and looking uncomfortable but proud. Maria stood with them, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. And Enzo stood to the side, watching Emily with an expression that made her heart stutter. Pride, love, and something deeper, purpose. The Second Chances Sanctuary will operate on 3 principles, Emily continued. First, no animal is beyond rehabilitation. We use positive reinforcement, patience and time, however much time it takes. Second, transparency. Every dollar donated, every animal's progress, every success and setback will be public record. And third, justice. This facility partners with law enforcement to rescue animals from fighting rings, abuse situations, and illegal trafficking. We don't just save animals, we prosecute the people who hurt them. The crowd applauded. Camera flashes popped. But Emily was watching one man in the back, mid-50s, worn jacket, holding a young girl's hand. He looked familiar in a way that made her chest tight. After the ceremony, as donors mingled and politicians made promises, the man approached. Up close, Emily recognized him. Detective Rodriguez, the cop who'd taken her statement 7 years ago about a stolen puppy. "You probably don't remember me," he started. "I do," Emily said. "You told me to stop wasting police resources looking for a dog." Rodriguez winced. "I did. And I was wrong. Dead wrong." He gently pushed the young girl forward. "This is my granddaughter, Sophia. She wants to volunteer here. Help with the dogs." Sophia looked up at Emily with solemn eyes. "My dad says you got your dog back, that you never gave up. I want to help other kids like you." Emily crouched down to Sophia's level. "We need volunteers exactly like you. People who understand that animals aren't things. They're family. Think you can handle that?" Sophia nodded seriously. "I'm very responsible, and I'm good with scary dogs." "They're just scared dogs pretending to be scary." Emily had to blink back tears. "You're hired. Starting next month, okay?" After they left, Enzo appeared at her elbow. "You're crying at your own victory party. Very off-brand." "Shut up," Emily said, laughing through tears. "I'm having a moment." "Have your moment later." Enzo's hand settled on her lower back, warm and possessive. "I have something to show you." He led her away from the crowd, toward the sanctuary's main building. Inside, the walls were still bare, the floors fresh, everything smelling of new construction and possibility. But in the center of the lobby stood a bronze statue, life-sized, detailed, beautiful. It was Cerberus, not the scarred weapon, but something in between. Strong, alert, protective, but with his head turned slightly, ears forward, like he was listening for someone he loved. At the base, a plaque read, "For Cerberus, who taught us that loyalty isn't demanded, it's earned," and for Emily, who proved that love is stronger than fear. Emily turned to Enzo, who was watching her with unusual nervousness. "You commissioned this," she whispered. "I commissioned this entire sanctuary," Enzo corrected. 20 million in initial funding, with annual operating budgets for the next 50 years, fully staffed, legally protected, and bearing my family name, the Dante Sanctuary. "You named it after yourself?" Emily's tone was teasing, but her eyes were bright with tears. "I named it after us," Enzo corrected, "the Dante Marcus Sanctuary. Equal partnership, remember? Your vision, my resources, our legacy." Emily looked at the statue, at the sanctuary beyond the windows, at the man who'd transformed from her enemy into her future. "You know what the best part of this is? That you get to spend millions of my money rehabilitating animals?" "That too," Emily agreed, "but mostly that you're doing this because you want to, not because it's good PR, not because it serves some criminal agenda. You're doing it because somewhere under all that expensive armor you're a good man." Enzo's jaw worked. "I'm not a good man, Emily. I've done things—" "You're a complicated man," Emily interrupted, "who's choosing to be better. That's different than being good. It's harder, more honest, and infinitely more valuable." She kissed him there, in the empty lobby of their shared dream, with Cerberus's statue watching over them like a guardian spirit. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips, "for building this. For believing in me," For being brave enough to change. Thank you, Enzo replied, for being foolish enough to stay, for seeing what I could be instead of what I was, for giving me a reason to want redemption instead of just power. Outside, the celebration continued. Inside, the Mafia boss and the waitress held each other in the sanctuary they'd built from trauma, loyalty, and the stubborn belief that broken things could heal if given enough love. Cerberus padded over, his therapy vest slightly askew, and pushed between them. They both laughed, making room for the dog who'd started everything. "Do you think he understands?" Emily asked, scratching behind Cerberus's ears. "What all this means?" "I think," Enzo said slowly, "he understands that he's finally safe, that we're his family, and that no one will ever hurt him again." "That's enough." Emily looked around the sanctuary, at the future they'd built, the lives they'd save, the legacy they'd leave. "Yeah," she said softly. "That's enough." As sunset painted the lobby in gold and amber, 3 beings who'd survived impossible odds stood together in the home they'd created. A man learning to trust, a woman learning her worth, and a dog who'd taught them both that the fiercest loyalty came not from fear, but from choosing, every single day, to stay. Their story had started with a stolen puppy and a desperate waitress. It ended with an empire reformed, a sanctuary built, and a love powerful enough to tame even the most untamable hearts. And in the end, that's all any of them had ever needed, someone worth staying for, something worth building together. And the courage to believe that broken things, whether people or pit bulls, deserved a second chance at peace. 1 year later, the annual Sanctuary Gala had become Manhattan's most unexpected social event. Where else could you find mafia lieutenants, Wall Street executives, and animal rescue volunteers sharing champagne and comparing dog photos? Emily moved through the crowd with practiced ease, Cerberus at her side wearing a bow tie that had taken 3 people and 15 minutes to attach. Enzo watched from across the room, surrounded by business associates, but tracking her every movement with possessive attention. "Your wife," Marco observed, "just convinced a federal prosecutor to adopt a 3-legged pit bull." "That's my wife," Enzo agreed, failing to hide his smile. "Dangerous, persuasive, and completely unstoppable." "The sanctuary's expanding to 3 new locations," Giuseppe added. "Boston, Philadelphia, and Miami. She's building an empire." "We're building an empire," Enzo corrected. "I just fund it. She makes it matter." Emily caught his eye across the room and smiled, that specific smile reserved only for him. The one that said, "I see you, I choose you, I love you without needing words." Enzo excused himself and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms despite the audience. "Dance with me," he commanded. "That's not a request," Emily observed, but she followed him to the floor anyway. As they moved together, Cerberus settled at the edge of the dance floor, his eyes tracking them with what could only be described as satisfaction. "Happy?" Enzo asked quietly. "Deliriously," Emily replied. "You?" "I married a woman who reorganized my entire life, costs me millions monthly, and regularly argues with me in front of my associates." Enzo's arms tightened around her. "I've never been happier." "Good answer," Emily said, kissing him as cameras flashed and their empire, legitimate, powerful, and built on loyalty instead of fear, celebrated around them. The mafia boss, the waitress, and the pitbull who'd brought them together. An unlikely family, an unbreakable bond, and a love story that proved sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was choose to stay.